I had to replace both rear calipers. These are 10 years old. Brake fluid changed every year to 2 years. They were leaking out the back, so both of them, and I had to change them out. As you can see, the piston side perfectly fine. It's sad, it's unfortunate, but let's take a look closer if these can be rebuilt easily at home or what's going on, because I haven't seen any videos on YouTube on rebuilding these, and the seal kits are $6. So let's start with this scary looking spring. There's a lot of rust and corrosion there. That seal looks like it's compromised. So we got a ton of brake fluid or moisture inside that seal. It's pretty gritty in there too. The surface looks horrible. Looks like brake fluid or something's been drying on here for a while. Obviously this is direction down, where all the fluid was sitting when the vehicle wasn't running too, or is just sitting in that boot. We got some green there. I see the color green, so that tells me that there's probably some copper inside of here that's corroding. Alright, let's get that piston out. Alright, we got the piston back from across the room. Basically, this guy looks extremely clean. Can't ask for anything nicer than that, especially for 10 years old. It's not scratched, it looks gorgeous. So I'm just going to get that out with a screwdriver, because this will take a very special pair of snap ring pliers to go that deep into that pocket and not scratch the bore. Okay, so we got that snap ring down there. Now let's get the parts out. And down inside you got a bearing and the shaft and a ball ramp. And there you got the empty shaft, or the empty pocket. And there's also an O-ring down there at the very bottom, you can see, so we'll take a closer look at that later. In case you're wondering how these parking brakes work, this is a ball ramp. So when you turn it, it makes this turning motion go into a linear motion. It's pretty cool. You start to see these more and more on cars. Alright, so now I'm going to pull out that seal that was leaking on me, and let's take a closer look at that. So if we look at the outside OD of that seal, that tells me that that casting surface looks like it was getting corroded. Look at that. So most likely the leak path was going around it. But it's also quite possible, the inside looks smooth, but it's definitely compression set. Now the question becomes, with the ID being compression set so much, because it's so old even though it's smooth, when the park brake was actuated, it's very possible that this seal burped and got fluid into that other boot. You can see how corroded in that wall is where the OD of that O-ring was sitting. I was looking closer at it, and it does appear that that is the grease filler media that suspends the oil got washed out with brake fluid, and then it hardened into a crystal, and it grew outwards, pressing in on the OD of that seal. That's what caused the deformation of that seal and a possible leak path around it over time. Now, what happened too, when they designed this, you got the O-ring seal right here. Then you got all this dead space, this green, where it's just air. There's no fluid here. So what happened is they put some grease for this bushing. And then when this seal started leaking, the oil or burping, the oil got washed out of the grease with brake fluid, and that's what those crystals that are sitting here that look like sand and around here, they look like corrosion sitting on the surface, is the filler medium for the grease. That eventually, when the crystals grew, it pushed down on the seal, allowing for oil to go around it on the outside for sure. And you also saw in the gland here that the grease started jacking the seal upward too when it got washed through, most likely by burping from the ID because of the compression set due to it being old. Now we can see that evidence clearly. Clearly on here you can see it looks kind of like a sand, but it's like a clear sand that's sitting in the gland that you can scrape off, and that would be the remnants of the seal or of the grease. You can see it good there too. There's the remnants of the grease that's also on the inside exactly like that, and that's why the O-ring would no longer seal. In the end, these calipers, they're not worth rebuilding or trying to rebuild, because you need a bunch of new parts for the parking brake mechanism. With this steel being all corroded, there's no point in trying to buff that off and try to make a perfect surface and just buy a new one. By the time you buy all the parts you need, you're already going to be near the price of just buying a reman. On top of that, with this aluminum surface all pitted and corroded, there's almost nothing here that you can salvage, even if your pistons look brand new. And that's mainly because of the parking brake mechanism area and these O-rings basically leaking and failing, and then the boot collecting it, causing all this corrosion and rust in here. Or vice versa, it could have flowed in the other way for the leak path. So that's why you see no videos on how to rebuild these things, because at the end of the day, it's not even worthwhile to do it at home with your own money buying the parts. You're not going to save anything. So this brake job took me about half a day, maybe a little bit longer than half a day. And the reason being is there's a countersink on the original calipers, and that same countersink, you can see the ledge right there, this ledge. That same countersink is also on the end of the brake hose, the block that's hanging off the end. And you think, it doesn't really matter, but I found out the hard way when I got these reman calipers out over at O'Reilly's. These are the copper washers that came with it, the copper crush washers for the brake hose. Now, the thing about it is, here's the original ones. So if you notice something, the OD of the original GM ones is quite small compared to the ones that came in a box. And it took me about 15 minutes or so to figure out why I couldn't get the brake hoses to seal, even when I bolted them down so tight I thought I was going to snap the banjo fitting. And it's because the countersink, the smaller washer, fits down in the countersink and onto the brake hose countersink, and it squashes in there perfect and seals. When you go and you take something that's larger than the countersink and put it on, you're now trying to seal on a surface that was never meant to be sealed on, and that's why all the brake fluid keeps shooting out. So I had to go and drive across town all the way to the GM dealer to get brand new crush washers. That's why this brake job took me half a day. The guy had one job, pick a crush washer, and he did do it, but he picked a crush washer that's not going to allow the caliper to seal. So I had to go get the smaller ones at GM because nobody ever carries the right crush washers. So that's another tip when you're working on these. Be careful about that. That's the part number for the crush washers for the brake hoses to the calipers for the rear.